The storm had been building all day, dark clouds rolling in and casting an ominous shadow over the small town. Evelyn, a woman of 64, had always found a strange comfort in the rain. There was something cleansing about it, something that seemed to wash away the weight of unspoken words and lingering regrets. She sat in her living room, a cup of chamomile tea cradled in her hands, listening to the distant rumble of thunder. The power flickered once, then twice, before plunging the house into darkness. The sudden loss of light startled her, and she fumbled to set her mug down on the coffee table without spilling. She reached for her phone, its dim screen casting a faint glow, and sighed when she realized the storm had knocked out the power for the entire block. It wasn't the first time it had happened, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. Evelyn lived alone in a cozy Victorian house on the edge of town, its creaky wooden floors and antique furniture a reflection of her love for all things timeless. Since her husband passed nearly a decade ago, she had filled her days with gardening, painting, and the occasional book club meeting, finding solace in the rhythm of her routines. But nights like this, silent, dark, and brimming with an almost tangible stillness, had a way of making her feel the weight of her solitude. As she lit a few candles and placed them around the room, she thought about her neighbors, most of whom she had known for years. They were kind people, always ready with a wave or a smile, but their interactions rarely went beyond polite small talk. Her closest neighbor, Daniel, lived just across the street. He had moved in 3 years ago, a quiet man in his late 60s with silver-streaked hair and a rugged handsomeness that hinted at a life well lived. They had exchanged pleasantries over the years, but Evelyn had always kept a respectful distance, unsure if he wanted more than the casual camaraderie of neighbors. As the storm raged on outside, Evelyn decided to check on Daniel. She grabbed her raincoat and flashlight, stepping out into the downpour. The rain was cold against her skin, soaking through her coat as she made her way across the street. She knocked on his door, her heart pounding louder than she cared to admit. After a few moments, the door opened to reveal Daniel, his hair damp and his expression one of pleasant surprise. "Evelyn," he said, stepping aside to let her in. "Come in before you catch a cold." She smiled, shaking off her coat and feeling an unexpected warmth as he took it from her and hung it on a nearby hook. His home was just as she had imagined, warm, inviting, and filled with personal touches that spoke to his character. A stack of books sat on the coffee table, a half-finished puzzle sprawled across the dining room table, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air. "I thought I'd check on you," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "The storm knocked out my power, and I figured it might have done the same here." Daniel nodded, gesturing for her to take a seat on the sofa. "It did," he said, "but I've got a generator out back. It's not much, but it keeps the essentials running." Evelyn sat down, her hands resting in her lap as she took in the details of his home. "You've made it very cozy," she said, glancing at the framed photos on the mantel. Daniel followed her gaze and smiled. "It's home," he said simply, sitting down across from her. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the sound of rain against the windows filling the room. "Would you like some coffee?" Daniel asked, breaking the quiet. Evelyn nodded, grateful for the offer. As he moved to the kitchen, she found herself watching him, noticing the way he moved with an easy confidence, the way his shoulders seemed to carry both strength and gentleness. When he returned with 2 mugs of steaming coffee, she smiled and thanked him, their fingers brushing briefly as he handed her the cup. The touch sent a jolt through her, and she quickly looked away, hoping he hadn't noticed the blush that crept up her cheeks. They talked for hours, the conversation flowing effortlessly as the storm continued outside. Daniel spoke of his life before moving to the small town, his career as a journalist, his travels, and the loss of his wife to cancer 5 years ago. His voice carried a quiet strength, a resilience born of love and loss. Evelyn shared her own story, her words weaving a tapestry of memories, joys, and heartaches. As they spoke, she felt a connection forming, a warmth that seemed to grow with every shared laugh and heartfelt confession. At some point, the storm began to subside, the rain lessening to a gentle patter. The candles burned low, casting a soft, flickering light that made the room feel almost magical. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes searching hers as he spoke. "Evelyn, I hope this doesn't come across as too forward, but I've always admired you. Your kindness, your grace. There's something about you that draws people in." His words took her by surprise, her heart racing as she tried to find the right response. "I've always admired you too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just didn't think you'd notice someone like me." Daniel chuckled, his smile warm and reassuring. "How could I not notice you?" he said, his hand reaching out to cover hers. The touch was gentle, but it carried an intensity that made her breath catch. "Evelyn," he said softly, "it's never too late for a new beginning." The words hung in the air, filled with unspoken promise. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he leaned closer, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that was both tender and electrifying. Evelyn felt herself melting into the moment, her fears and doubts dissolving in the warmth of his embrace. They spent the rest of the night talking, their connection deepening with every word, every touch. By the time the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds, Evelyn knew her life would never be the same. As she stepped out into the morning light, Daniel by her side, she felt a sense of hope she hadn't known in years.